God's will and our highest good are never at odds. And I don't think people really understand
Mm,
that.
I
Like God's
like that. Yeah.
That's yeah, my pastor said that. So I'm like, I can say it, but I'm like, oh yeah. He said that like 3 months ago, and it was so healing to hear that. Like God's will is always your highest good is always going to be fulfilled in God's will. It might not be what's easiest in the short term, but
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurship isn't what's easiest in the short term.
It
Having
is.
a
It is
kid
not.
isn't. Being married isn't. Like none of
It
the
is
things
not.
that are good for you in the long term that are best for you are going to grow you into the person you're supposed to be or give
That's
you the
true.
fulfillment in life. You don't get fulfillment without changing a few diapers. You don't get fulfillment without having some hard conversations and fights with your significant other. Like
Hey, how you guys doing? This is Lionel Mosby Jr., and you're now in with the Lion and the Lambo podcast. And we just want to let you know we're streaming on every major streaming platform. And of course, if you want to catch the visual experience, you can catch us on over at YouTube. And I'm in today with a good brother that we've been connecting for a while, right? I see his heart for the Lord. I see his heart for the individuals that he's seeking to be able to connect and work with. And so I know I'm going to enjoy this conversation. We're going to be able to really deep dive in. Ben, man, how you doing, man? How's everything been with you?
wow. I feel amazing. I think being on this podcast with you already and just seeing your energy and how you conduct yourself, it's such a blessing. And the thing that I love about podcasts is no matter how much you predict it, you don't know what's going to happen. And even just
Mm,
seeing the context that you've set already with us praying first and just the way you do things, it's set such a good context and it's such a good lesson for anybody who's in business as far as these.
mm,
Like the moments that you don't know what's going to come out of them or what's going to happen or the relationships that you've been given, everything is something for you to steward. And I think
mm,
about that because I sat down this morning with someone who was just like, hey, I want to be your business partner. And they're
mm.
older than me, they have way more resources than me. But when they
Right.
came into my life, it was really just you have some experience, Ben, working with teens. We have a nonprofit we're trying to start. This has been months in the making, or just
Hmm.
advising on, and just the way you show up, the way you do that thing over months, people see your character, and
Right.
out of nowhere, a door might open to you based on how you stewarded the smallest relationship that you didn't think was much that maybe you met with once a week, maybe just
Mm.
how you responded to their texts, how you respond to their emails. And that's the thing that I see with you and written all over you is just that spirit of excellence with which you do things. It's small, but it adds up and it makes an impression. So
Oh man, I
I'm
appreciate it.
grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to be here.
Oh man, well bless your heart. I appreciate you, you know.
Yeah.
So it's I like how you said, right? It's how we steward, right? Everything that
Yeah.
we have access to, you know, makes me think about the verse in Luke chapter 16, I believe it's verse 10, you know, God talks about that even in, you know, how we treat the least of these things, right? Is how we
Yeah.
would treat the much, right? And so at the end of the day,
Yeah.
we have to take care of, right? And steward, like you say, right?
Mm.
Even these smaller, these things that we consider small, because a lot of times the
Hmm.
things that we may consider them small, but they have such a big impact, right? You know, and God knows that. So, yeah,
Yeah. And I
man.
wanna touch on something because um I showed up a minute or two late and I
Mm-hmm.
hate doing that. And that like is something that bothers me so much.
Uh huh.
And it's also like a thing when I talk about stewardship, like I love respecting people's time and I'm
Mm-hmm.
maybe late like once every month and a half, once every 2 months, and it's always a window for me to look at what's going on. And I think like that's the beautiful thing is today I put too much on my plate and I
Mm-hmm.
tried doing too much on my own. And I think that's been such a good lesson that God's been showing me is
Mm.
like when I try and do too much on my own, like yes, we're called to steward things and to grow and to multiply things, but there's a level of understanding what your role is and what God's role is. And when you start taking on too much, when you start taking on too much and you start taking on things that is more what God wants to do in your life, that's
Mm-hmm.
when you run into problems. And that's when
Mm.
outwardly you'll start to see the fruit suffer a little bit. And that might just
Wow.
be being 1 minute late for one thing. But like for me, that's always an indication like, okay, Ben, you're making this about you. And that's like a good moment after this where I'm gonna
Mm.
just sit down with God, heart check, what's going on here.
That's a good, I mean, that's a good point, right? It's, and I think we all have to have those kind of markers in our life and experience. I think I saw a post that you put up recently where you're talking about, your goal about friendship, right? And how you
Mm,
kind of can measure, well, have you gotten nature and have you spent time
mm,
with a friend, and that's a way for
mm.
you to measure, right? Like, am I kind of in this, in this space where I'm
Mhm.
good, right? Or
Yeah,
have I missed out on that? Then that means, okay,
yeah,
something I need to maybe step back and kind of realign. I know for
yeah,
me, I always think about, okay, do I have I had time to just sit down and be able to read, right?
yeah,
Just to be able to
yeah,
just sit down and simply just read a book, right? For example, right? Like, so we all need these different markers in our life and in our experience
yeah.
so that we can make sure that, like you say, am I putting this on me, for example, right? Or am I kind of walking into, God's role and saying like, well, you don't have to take care of these things.
Yeah,
I go ahead and take those off your plate, right? You know what
yeah,
I mean? Like,
yeah, yeah,
no.
yeah, yeah.
So
And
yeah,
it's,
man.
I think about promotion comes from the Lord. I wish I could remember what Bible verse says, but
Mm-hmm.
there's I think about that even, and it's something like I got to pick up my pastor from the airport this weekend, and just I love just talking with him and getting to know him more and hearing his heart. And he asked me a question about something within the church. He's like, "Would you want to step into this?" And I
Mm-hmm.
told him, I said, when I was at Elevation Church 2 years ago, I think I left there a year and a half or whatever it was. I remember meeting with them right away and saying, "Hey, I see this hole. I see this need. This is my experience. I could do this. I could grow this. I could bless this area." And
Mm-hmm.
they were just kind of like, "You're so new here." They didn't say it, but the impression I got is, "You're so new here. Just wait. Be patient." And when they did promote me in that area, it was like with the small groups and leading some of the small group leaders and just getting to serve and do some cool things there.
Mm-hmm.
It was so much responsibility at once. It was
Mm.
so much weight at once. It was so many. I'm now taking care of so many people or emotional well-being or just time or things. And there were so many other balls that I had to drop or stop
Mm.
juggling or things to put down in order to make that work.
Right.
And from then on, I think God showed me like, why do you keep asking for a promotion? And as I've
Mm.
moved to LA, I've been here 11 months in this church. I haven't asked for any promotion. I haven't asked for anything, and it's been given in time and in the right season.
Right.
But all the things that I thought I wanted that now I have, if I would have asked for them at the beginning, like, would that have taken away from what God wanted to do in the other areas of my life? And I look at how many people in the
Mm.
church that I've been able to just grab a cup of coffee with, how many other things that I've been able to build that I wouldn't if I was in that. And
Right.
maybe God's like, hey, you need to know who you are personally
Mm-hmm.
before I put you over more people again, because I'm shaking up your life and you're
Mm.
stepping into a new season. And there's going to be things that I'm shaking out of your life that are not your identity. They've been
Mm.
more something that you've had to take on due to circumstance. And you need to be clear about what your identity is before I put you in a new situation and
Mm.
you start taking on those things as well.
Mm. That's big,
Yeah.
So Ben, let us know what how do you introduce yourself, for example, right? Because we're already getting into it, and you're already dropping a
Yeah.
lot of jewels that the Lord has blessed you to
Yeah.
receive. But how do you introduce yourself, right? If somebody approaches, say, "Hey, Mr. Ben, how are you? Nice to meet you." Shake your hand. Like, how do you
Yeah.
introduce yourself? You know,
I'm probably going to give you the worst answer ever, and I'm
it's
just
okay.
going to
No,
own it. Is I don't. I don't. When
that's
people,
good.
I always ask what other people are doing. Usually it's 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes before people even know what I do.
Mm,
And like I just listen. Like I love listening to people. And like if we sat down and just had this conversation, it wasn't being recorded and you weren't asking me questions, I would just care what's going on in your life. Like I want to know what you
mm,
do. I want to know what's important to you. I want to know your heart. And once I know
mm,
someone's heart and I've listened, then I know what to sell them on. And
mm-hmm.
I would say that God's blessed me with the ability, and maybe this will answer your questions, just to be a master salesperson.
Hmm.
And that gets a terrible rap, sales. It's thought of as greedy and all these things, but like evangelism is sales.
Come on. Yeah.
Being a dad is sales. Like you're constantly having to sell your kid on
Yeah.
why eating cookies, playing video games, like why that's not the best thing for them, why they actually need to brush their teeth, why it's better for
Right.
them to go to school. Like they didn't have a good day at school yesterday. Some kid made fun of them. You're having to
Mm-hmm.
sell them on why should they go back to school again today. So it's like
Mm,
you're always selling people, and what I'm always selling people on is that they're more valuable than they think they are to God.
mm,
First, I want them to know they're more valuable than they think they are. Over time, I'm going to include the to God, depending on what the
right.
relationship is with God. And I'm just going to start there, that you're more
Mm,
loved than you realize that you're. And so I'm always selling a person that God has more in store for them, or
yeah.
that, and I don't know what to sell people on until I listen enough to know their heart, to know where they're at, to know where they're coming from, to know where they're broken, to know where they're, and that's the area that I'm going to encourage them in.
Mm,
So I'm a master salesman, I'm a master encourager. And even when I
mm,
say master, those are not things I was great at. Those are skills that God has developed in me
right.
over years of me showing up and being terrible at those things,
Right.
and God just little by little developing those and me realizing like, okay, these are good enough now that I'm going to get paid to do them.
Right.
And then I think they're both just tie into spiritually. I'm just trying to sell people that them coming to church one time is going to be worth their while. They're going to find
Mm,
something
I
there that they
like that.
haven't found. And encouraging people, once people come into the church or wherever it is, I'm just trying to encourage people because people look at the devil like he's trying to defeat you. Most
Mm-hmm.
time he's trying to discourage you or distract you. If he could do those two things, like he doesn't even want you to fight. If you fight, there's a chance that you win. Even
Yeah.
if you get defeated, there's a good chance that you're going to get closer to God or learn a lesson in the process. He
Yeah.
doesn't even want you to show up to battle.
Yeah.
90% of the time, he's just trying to discourage or distract you. And so
Mm,
when I know that all week long, he's trying to discourage the people around me, trying to discourage me, if I can just be an encourager, I'm doing the
right.
opposite. And so that's
Right.
my goal when I show up to church on a Sunday or a small group on a Tuesday is I just want to encourage people.
Man, that's awesome, man. And it's so interesting, right, to hear you talk about identity, right? To talk about purpose, to talk about,
Yeah.
because it's like now I can hear you. You're saying, well, I didn't always start here, right?
Yeah.
But it's like now you can speak it with such confidence, but yet at the same time, you still hear the humility, right? In the statement at the same time, right? And it's almost like a weird contrast, right? Like, how can I speak?
Yeah.
How can I say, like, I consider myself a master salesman, a master encourager, right? You know what I'm saying? How can I say that, right? Because coming out of another voice or another person, right, with a different mindset, right, who maybe gone through
Yeah.
different experience, that may come off as completely like bullish, right? Completely like man, jockish, right? But
Yeah.
yet I can hear you, right? And I know the listeners can hear and say,
Yeah.
man, but like I can hear the reliance on God in that statement at the same time. I can
Yeah.
hear the humility, right? How do you come to a point to where that can be that balance, right? To where I have complete confidence in what God has skilled me
Yeah.
in, right? What God
Yeah.
has led me to be, while at the same time still not allowing that confidence, right? Or that ability that now I have to overcome me, right? And now my identity is now in the thing instead of actually the
Yeah.
person who gave me the ability in the first place. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So, um, if you would have interviewed me 3 years ago, you would have met the version of me that was arrogant and all these things. And it's funny, I heard a pastor that I'm like friends with say one time, like, humility is the journey, humility is the result. It's just, are you going to choose to humble yourself, or is God going to have to be the one that humbles you?
Mm-hmm.
And if God's the one that humbles you, I guarantee you it usually hurts more. It's
Yeah.
usually more like embarrassing. It's usually like if you humble yourself, and I'm going to tie this into confidence, is
Mm-hmm.
there's a type of confidence that comes from knowing and living it. Like you
That's a
can
good point.
practice all you
Mm,
want. And everyone does this, is when
right.
you're a little kid and the game's on the line and you're in the backyard and you're practicing 3, 2, 1, and you shoot the basket, and you practice over and over as a little kid, whether you're practicing being Michael Jordan or Steph Curry or Chris Paul or whatever. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of kids grow up doing that. They practice when the game's on the line, doing the thing. And you can be as confident as you want in practice, but there's a different confidence that comes from the first time you hit a game winning shot, and then the
Yeah.
second, and then the 50th, and the 100th, and
Facts.
the 200th. And that's why Steph Curry's in the NBA, is because he's practiced in his backyard, and he was probably a level of confident, but the first time he hit it in a game, there was a different sense of knowing and a different sense of confidence he
Mm,
got from that.
right.
And
Right.
it's that it's God will take you into situations where you're going to get put on your butt, and you're going to have to get back up and rely on God to get back up, and the
Mm-hmm.
confidence that you had in yourself, he can take that away real quick. And
Mm,
and once you've fallen down and gotten back up 10, 15, 20, 30 times, just a different level of confidence you have, knowing that God will pick you back up, that you can get back up, that all those things. So that's why I have that confidence. And I would also
mm,
say, the humility also comes from God I identify as a leader very strongly. Like, and what I mean by that is I've been in different positions of leadership for the
right.
last 6, 7 years. I've taught leadership. I coach people. I lead people. God has had every single thing that I'm involved in, that I'm leading, and at the same time twice over the last 4 years.
Mm,
And both those times, I feel like what God was saying to me is, your identity is first as a child of God. It's not in what you do. What
right.
you do is your calling, it's your purpose, but it's not your identity.
Right.
And if you ever get that mixed up, this goes back to humility. God can take everything away. And he's done it twice with me. And when you lose everything twice, maybe you learned something. I learned something. And
Mm,
so I think that the confidence of the humility comes from the experience and the knowing who God is, and the experience of going through some hard things.
mm. Now, how does a person get to that point though? Right, to where, man, because now I've maybe been putting in work for this thing for so
Yeah.
long, to now be at this place of position where I'm
Yeah.
now this master seller or whatever. Like, how can that not be my identity though, after I've put in 20, 25, 30 maybe years, right, to come to this specific position? Like, it's kind of hard for me to differentiate between this being, a part of who I am. You get what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
how does a person still be excellent in this thing, right? Still put forth their effort to be the best, right? That they can be, that God has made them to be in a specific role that He has purpose for them to be in,
Yeah.
while at the same time not making that thing who I am. Because I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of people out there are, they be listening and saying, like, I hear you, but I don't
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I don't want to say it's not your job to understand, but I will say
Mm,
this is, I was having a conversation with a friend yesterday, and we were talking about running. as a Christian versus like knocking and saying, is this right? Is this right? God, should I do this? God, should I do this? God, should I do this? And I was saying, I believe that you can run as a Christian when you do your part. And a verse that's been standing out to me a lot recently is delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. When you are making time each day to delight yourself in the Lord, to enjoy praying, to enjoy speaking with him, to have that time every day, you can trust the desires of your heart and you can run with them. And so if the desires of your heart are for business, great. Like God's given you them. You're delighting yourself in the Lord, you know, and you can run. But when you're not delighting yourself in the Lord, when you're not making time to spend time with God,
Yeah.
when you're not, when even you're praying, but there's no passion, there's no sizzle, you're doing it just
Yeah.
kind of begrudgingly. It's just a thing that you check off the list. The desires of your heart, they might not be in alignment or in place, and that's when you're
Yeah.
going to have uncertainty and fear and be double-minded and
Yes.
wondering, is this a me thing? Is this a God thing? So I think sometimes just do you, the Bible has a lot of parts where it basically says, this is your job, this is God's job. A lot of verses where it breaks down, you do this, God will do this. And that's one of them. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart.
Yeah. Yeah, that's factual, man. And it's true because a lot of Christians that I've, seen experience, even in my experience, right? That anxiety, that fear, right? That thought process or mindset of, like you say, wavering, right? That double-mindedness is there a lot of times because it's like, man, should I do this? Should I go this way, right? And it's like, our minds are so weighed down that we literally become, I call it paralyzed, right? You know what I'm
Mm,
saying? We become
yeah,
paralyzed in those mindsets and we end up not doing anything. We're just like
yeah,
the man with the talents who was given one and end up just burying the
yeah,
talent, right?
yeah.
Because of how
Hmm.
we're viewing, oh, you're a hard taskmaster, right? You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
knew that you reaped where you had not sowed, right? And because of
Yeah.
that view, because of that fear, we end up not
Mm,
even seeking to accomplish that which God literally gave it to us, right? You know what I mean? He literally gave it to us. Like, you at least could have put it to the exchangers, right? You know what I mean?
yeah.
To grow
Yeah.
that skill. Um,
Yeah.
and so, it is something that I know that you've experienced. I've definitely experienced it in my life
Yeah.
personally, and also in with other individuals that I talk to. And I realize that this is something that is really important for us to have conversations around and to help our brothers and sisters to understand that they do not have to fear that, when you're walking and Christ is walking side by side, you can trust him that he says, look, if you go left, right, you will hear a voice saying, turn this way, right, and walk in
Yeah.
it, right. But
Yeah.
when you have that picture, it's just like you're saying, you can run, right. And in
Yeah.
that picture that he painted, it's like you're moving, right.
Yeah.
It's you don't need to be told to go this way or that way. You're not even moving, right. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like,
Yeah.
let's move, let's move hand
Yeah.
in hand with Jesus,
Yeah.
and then watch where he leads us, right.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's I think a lot of people want to know what the will of God is, and the will of God, a big part of the time, is he tells you what his ways are. And the will of God, a lot more so, I find, is walking in his ways rather than trying to make all the right decisions. Like if you're walking in his ways, you can do anything for God's glory. Like in whatever you do, whether in word and deed, do it unto the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Like that verse alone, there's so much freedom in like whatever you do, pick something, do anything, whatever you do. And I heard a really good sermon by Erwin McManus that talked about some
Okay.
people spend so much time trying to pick which good thing to do that they don't do any good thing.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
and it's like God's like, do any good thing. Like take
Yes.
your money and go invest it over here, go invest it there, go do this with your talents, go do this. Like pick something
Right.
and just do something with it.
Right. Right.
Um,
And that goes back to knowing your identity, like you had mentioned earlier, right? Because when you know your identity, who you are in Christ, that confidence, that confidence he gives us with being in that place, right, is an assurance that,
yeah,
okay, we can now move forward. And you mentioned, for example, about knowing that, okay, I'm a master seller, I'm a master encourager, right? I think one thing that I also have seen that I would, that I want you to speak to is, in the Christian space, a lot of time too, we kind of really downplay the gifts that God gives us, right?
Mm. Yeah.
If I can't sing, right, or maybe
Mhm.
play a specific, not even any instrument, like it got to be certain
Yeah.
instruments, right? If I
Yeah.
can't play a certain type of instrument, or if I can't sing, or if I can't preach, or what's some of the other major ones, right? Like, if we can't do these specific things, right,
Yeah.
it's kind of like, well, how can I monetize this thing, right? Can I
Yeah.
use this
Yeah.
thing to actually take
Yeah.
care of my family? Like, no, I think I have to leave this thing, go find something totally different to
Mhm.
then go take care of my family, and maybe use that thing to minister over here somewhere, right?
Yeah.
But I can't use that thing itself to actually do both. And when I heard you say master encourager, and then how you're using that, right?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, for you, why do you think that's the reason that people kind of downplay these abilities, these gifts that obviously are God given, these skills that they've grown, that to them
Yeah.
seem so minuscule, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not even looking to actually walk in that gift to take care of both sides of ministering, but also financing, right, the life that God is trying to bless them to live too.
So do you think, why do you think people struggle with the concept of,
Yeah, yeah.
okay.
Why do they struggle? With that concept that both that it can be done, right, and kind of
Mhm.
downplaying that thing, right. And also just maybe speaking to them, and showing maybe example, even in your world, for example, of how it's possible, right, to use this thing to and monetize it, right,
Yeah.
whatever it may
So
be.
yeah, so I think there's a lot of misbeliefs about who God is. I think whatever your beliefs are about God, you will
Hmm,
find a way to live into that in some way. If you
that's
believe
factual.
that God is demanding, just like the parable that you brought up, like I know you're a hard man.
Hmm.
You're going to find a way to bury your gifts because you
Hmm.
got to get everything right. It's got to be perfect. You can't get anything wrong in front of God. God doesn't show grace. So don't make any decision. It's better to make no
Hmm.
decision than to make the wrong decision. So then you do
Hmm.
that. So if you have a broken view of who God is, then I think one of the biggest areas where people have a broken view of who God is they either see too much pressure on themselves to get it right and to do things, and they don't realize where their source comes from in God.
Hmm.
And so they have this standard of themselves that is such high greatness, and maybe they compare themselves to a Stephen Furtick, or maybe they compare themselves to these other people and they say, oh, I need to be that, and they don't realize where his strength comes from.
Hmm.
Or there's the exact opposite, where there's so much almost shame around ambition as a Christian.
Yeah.
Like they look at, let's even say Steph Curry, who I was listening to a podcast yesterday. I want to say it's with Michael Porter Jr. Is that
Hmm.
right? He's a Christian. He plays for the Nuggets. Either way, he signed a $207 million contract, and they had him
Hmm.
on, and they were asking him, like, as a Christian, what do you think? How's the money? Like, what has this done to you? They're asking him questions. He's talking about how great Steph Curry is off the court as far as his walk with God. That was just really cool to hear. And I think
Hmm.
people see that and they think it's all right with sports, but they don't think it's all right for them in their life to be great in some way. And they don't think like it's almost like ambition's a dirty word in
Yes.
Christianity.
Yes.
And we think that we're like glorifying God by being super
Regular.
yeah. I almost want to take it the other way where it's like the teacher mentality, where
Hmm.
it's like, I'm going to live on so little money,
Mm.
nothing good's going to
Yeah.
happen to me. I'm going to be
Yeah.
impoverished. I'm going to suffer for God. And I think there's
Yes.
a misunderstanding of suffering and blessing as Christians. I think
Hmm.
that some people make themselves suffer rather than realizing God's going to do that for you. God's going to make you suffer in some ways. He's going to give you a path in life that's going to make you grow. You don't need to add to it. And
That's a
the
good point.
exact the exact opposite is true with blessing, where I think some people feel that maybe they have to earn their blessings. And they don't even, and that's not grace. That's not grace.
Great
Um,
point.
and so I think we also are guilty as a church. Like I see people, like I get on YouTube and I see every major minister and someone putting out a YouTube video about how they're a false prophet or what they're doing wrong or tearing them down. And within the church, there's already so many people from the outside coming for you, that when we're doing that to people that are excelling or exceeding in some way inside the church, and we're doing that to each other, and we're knocking people down and saying this and this about their money systems with or what they're doing without knowing where their money goes,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, is that really helpful? And the thing that I think about is, like, I'm familiar with Robert Morris or a little bit of his story,
Mm-hmm.
and people could make as much, they could say whatever they want about him for being wealthy, but what they don't know is, like, I think in the span of 18 months he gave away his car 9 times. He's given away his home 3 times because God told him to do it without a backup plan some of those times for where he was going to live. Like, just his faithfulness and like everything, money is just, this is God's.
Right,
Like,
right,
it's not mine. He understands this is God's. And so,
right.
yeah.
And that's the perspective. And I mean, when you're saying this, like that, we have to have those both sides mentality, because, like you say, on one side, it's we see poverty or this lack, or that, okay, well, that person, if we're looking at, like, okay, they're pushing through for God, right, to do this thing specifically
Yeah.
for whatever group or community that they're serving for, etc., right? But when
Mhm.
it comes to the flip side and the opposite, we don't see and say, okay, well, this person is also doing this for God, right? Because they
Mhm.
also can serve and can bless and can and do much, right? I mean, and we see this
Mhm.
in the story of the scriptures, right? When we see
Yeah.
the followers of Christ, right? Like,
Yeah.
it was a blessing that Joseph of Arimathea could go to Pilate and say, "Hey, I want to get the body of Jesus, right? So
Yeah.
that, and I want to use the tomb, right? That I have.
Yeah.
I'm dedicating this, right, to
Yeah.
him, so that now we can have
Yeah.
this beauty of the resurrection. You know what I mean? That
Mhm.
story right now, right? Because the
Mhm.
tomb now, the stone gets to be
Yeah.
rolled away, right? The angels get to come,
Yeah.
like, but he played a part in that, right? You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It wasn't simply just John and just Peter, right? But there
Yeah.
also was a Joseph and a Nicodemus that are also a
Yeah.
part of this story that people play different parts of, right? And when we
Mhm.
think about the church growing in Acts, right, we see those that were going and putting forth the work, those who had need, but
Yeah.
also those who had the, guess what? In order for them to go sell and give as every man had need, they also had
Yeah.
to acquire as well, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Mhm.
we don't need to make it to where, at least that's, I feel that maybe that's one of the things that has come out of some of the history of the church, is that we have held on to a lot of views that poverty is a piety
Yeah.
type of mindset,
Yeah.
and to look down upon individuals um, who have gotten wealthy, right, or who are,
Yeah.
like you say, ambitious, even, right, because not even necessarily that they have to have wealth per se, but
Yeah.
even the desire sometimes to be ambitious is kind of looked
Yeah.
down upon. But to me,
Yeah.
that quells the ability for us to do a lot of things for God that we
Yeah.
could do, because guess what? The innovative mindset and thought
Yeah.
process is quelled, because ambition is not just about finances, right? It's not just money,
Yeah.
right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When we
Mhm.
quell ambition, that affects a lot of other areas of life,
Yeah.
and I think in certain ways, still being pretty young myself, in certain ways, I feel also this is a reason the church has a big issue with youth and young adults, right? Is
Yeah.
because ambition is, shrinking like this inside the four walls, right? Whereas
Yeah.
outside, it's like, if you can do, I remember one of my, and I'm gonna throw it back to you, but I remember one of my friends, he works for NASA now. When he first got there, is a guy he said come from UCF. He's a freshman. He was just coming on this project, right? He wasn't even like hired, right? But
Yeah.
they threw him on a project where he was working on this glove for like the military, right? Like the federal government, right? And he helped to program this glove for the military. Like, and it's like, think about that person who's in that regular civilian world, right? You know, who's a freshman, like working with senior programmers, right? But yeah, he gets to be a part of creating something that's so awesome. But now when we come to the church, it's like, no, you're the future. You're later, right? Don't have ambition. Don't think about how we can take care of this whole homeless problem on this side of town. But no, let them be as ambitious as possible, right?
Yeah.
And you are there to help steer them and guide them to keep, you know what I mean, but not like to quell them, you know. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. 100%. And I think because we have a broken view of ambition and money, we also do a disservice where people don't want to become Christians because we don't see using our gifts to honor God. We almost more see sacrificing your gifts for God. And like I think a
I
thing that
get you.
we don't really get is that um God's will and our highest good are never at odds. And I don't think people really understand that.
I
Like God's
like that. Yeah.
my pastor said that. So I'm like, I could say it, but I'm like, oh yeah. He said that like 3 months ago, and it was so healing to hear that. Like God's will is always your highest good is always going to be fulfilled in God's will. It might not be what's easiest in the short term, but entrepreneurship isn't what's easiest in the short term. Having a
It is
kid
not.
isn't. Being married isn't. Like none of
It
the
is
things
not.
that are good for you in the long term that are best for you are going to grow you into the person you're supposed to be or give
That's
you the
true.
fulfillment in life. You don't get fulfillment without changing a few diapers. You don't get fulfillment without having some hard conversations and fights with your significant other. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think about that, just a
Wow.
misunderstanding, and I think people believe that like God has mainly called us to be a servant for Him, and I don't think that there's that understanding of like what a father is, and like a healthy understanding of a father, and that a father wants what's best for his kids. He's not
Mm-hmm.
just trying to have you sacrifice everything to make him look good, but you do it in a way that is a burden to you. Like he wants what's good for you.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's so true. And I know that that you also work and empower a lot of men, right?
Yeah.
Um do, how do you see, you know, your specific giftings, right? And how God has led you, right? How do you see that, you know, him using that through you, right? To now work and empower us guys, right?
It's a great question. So the thing about us guys is throughout history, whenever you see books and movies, the protagonist, the main character, the hero is usually a male.
Mm-hmm.
And we grow up seeing that as kids. Even like I said, in the backyard, if you're 3, 2, 1, you're practice shooting it, you're practicing being Michael Jordan.
Right.
If you grow up wrestling, like as a little kid, you wrestle your dad, you're Hulk Hogan, you're whoever. Um, and there's almost this pressure on men to be the hero in every single situation
Mm,
and to be strong in every situation and to win every battle. And that's not true. Like as men, a lot of times we might go throughout our life, we might go 234 wins and 138 losses. Like you're going to
right.
take a lot of losses to get where you want to go. Even if
Right.
you own a business, you're going to fail a lot to get there.
Mm,
And
that's
so
true.
with men, there's such a laying down of their emotions, their needs, their desires, everything that makes them who they are, connection, love, all those things in the pursuit of success, achievement, getting it right, perfectionism, and being the best.
Mm,
And the pressure that that creates on men is pretty high. It ruins a lot of marriages. There's often an imbalance, and even so much so that men as a whole live 5 years less than women, even though
mm-hmm.
supposedly we have more advantages. because we don't have connection. We don't have an outlet for our emotions. We live under so much pressure.
Mm,
So for me, the biggest gift that I really bring clients is I teach them how to build relationships that bring the best out in themselves,
mm-hmm.
that bring out the best in those around them so their team performs twice as well without them being the one to do it. And they actually build leaders and their businesses grow, their organizations grow, their companies grow, their families grow, their
Mm,
kids grow, their wife grows because they're focused on making everyone else around them great rather than focused on their own greatness. And they start to take some of that pressure off themselves. And then they allow themselves to open
mm,
up, be vulnerable, have relationships, have connection, and their life gets like twice as meaningful as well in the process. So,
mm. That's awesome. It's almost made me think about discipleship, right? Because it's like now it's not just me focused on, well, how great can I be, right? Or
yeah,
others are dropping the ball, right? How can I pick up the
yeah,
slack, right? It's like now I'm focused on, okay, they dropped the ball, okay, how can I teach them, right,
yeah,
to better handle this thing, right? So, but it's not coming back on you. It's now you teaching outwardly, right, to make everybody better, which I can see how that literally changes your mindset and thought process immediately.
yeah,
Just from thinking
yeah.
of that differently.
And that's what multiplying yourself is in the most basic concept with kids. Hopefully, you raise them to be better than you. You want your kids to be better than you if you're a good parent.
Right.
And if you don't ever take that like basic understanding of who we are as humans and apply that to the business world as well, like every
Mm,
protege or every person I coach, I want them to be better, get there faster than I did. I don't want
mm,
them to have to fall down 10 times. I don't want them to have to face their deepest, darkest parts of
right.
themselves in order to get there. I don't want it to take as long as it took me. I don't want
Mm,
them to mess up as many things along the way as it did for me. So it's just that like I'm when you're more focused on who you're raising up and who you're sending out, your
that's
mission
good.
grows two by two. It's exponential.
Right.
Whereas
Right.
whereas when it's just about you, like
Yeah.
your mission or your purpose can only grow like additionally rather than exponentially.
And I mean, everything that grows, like that's one lesson that I've learned is if something stays the same, then it's really dying, right? So like
Yeah.
growth is multiplying, right? It's
Yeah.
expanding, it's getting better. Like so, yeah, that like you say, you now growing others, right, to be able to be better than you, right, to be able to now do this thing quicker than you did.
Yeah.
That's growth, right? But if it's
Yeah.
only focused on you and everything is coming more in, you're becoming more isolated, more insulated,
Hmm.
right? Like that's death, that's dying, right? And I can hear you
Yeah.
saying that in the same thing from an emotional standpoint because you don't have an outlet. This is the reason we die
Yeah.
quicker because we don't have
Yeah.
that outlet. I want to ask you too, like when you first like how did you know, I guess, right, that or how did you take this mindset or this thought process and say, okay, this is a way I can actually monetize this thing, right? Because I think that's a lot of times what for especially faith-based Christian entrepreneurs or people who are aspiring,
Hmm.
right, is they're looking at this thing that they have ability in or they have a passion for, but they don't really see like how they can do that. So I mean, can you walk us through like how did you go from recognizing this thing to now saying, okay, well, this is how I could actually monetize it, and even like know that it's a valuable thing that
Yeah.
is monetizable. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
the right word, right?
Yeah.
Monetizable,
Hmm.
but you get what I'm
So yeah. So
saying.
instead of telling you how I knew, I'm just going to tell what I would do if I was the listener, because this might be a
Okay.
little more helpful. Is I would pick 10, 20, 30, 40 people who you think would be your ideal client. Like whatever it is that you're wondering if it's monetizable, you have to figure out if people actually want it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And even what tweaks they might need in order to actually want it and for it to work with their life. So just start picking people that you would like to work with, that you would like to help, that you have a product that you think would benefit their life, and just ask them if you can ask them a few questions. Ask if they're willing to hop on a call with you for 10 minutes. Ask and just start having phone calls, having text message conversations. Whenever you meet somebody, go to a support group for that thing. If it's a program for single moms, go be around some single moms and just ask them questions. What do they think about the idea? What do they like? What do they dislike? What would make it a perfect win for them? What are they and the what you'll learn in all that is that you usually have a monetizable idea. It's just rough. It's
Mm,
just the beginning stages, and people tell you what parts they would need to it in order for it to work for them. And then once you've created all that, like you've made it better, go back to those same people and say, "Hey, I took your feedback. I'm so grateful you did this. I created this thing to be exactly what you said. Is that something that you would actually be interested in?" Or I do this in the beginning when I get feedback is, "Hey, if I create this way, I'm going to take your feedback. Is that something you'd be interested in me reaching back out and telling you about?" And people are usually like, "Yes, yeah, reach back out if you have exactly what I want and what I've
hmm
told you that I want." And so then you just reach back out to people, you sell them that
mm,
thing, and you don't get so caught up in the
mm,
details. Like everyone who says, "I need a website, I need a marketing plan, I need social media, I need perfect pictures, I'm like, no, you just need a sale. Get some money. Once you get some money coming in, then it's a business. Then you're actually getting paid. Then you can fund those things. But don't try and make things perfect now. Just try
mm,
and give as many people exactly what they want with the amount of resources you have. And as you get
mm,
more resources, help make that product a little bit better because you will always be either improving your product and or doing new things with marketing. Those are the two things
mm,
that you need if you're going to make any business work is you have to continually add more value or make a better product and you have to get better at marketing. And
mm,
every great millionaire billionaire like those two things. Tony Robbins, I think he's worth like I don't know how many hundreds of millions, but he talks about
mm,
those things. You have to improve your concept or your offer or your product, and you have to market it well. You have to keep
right.
getting those two things. And
Mm.
so
That's
just know
awesome.
that that's a never-ending journey. And in the moment or in the near short term, just
Mm,
make offers, just help people with whatever resources you have.
mm. I like that, right? Start with what's in your hand is what I always say, just like God told Moses,
Amen.
right?
Yeah.
And then you go and build from there. I really like the thought process of going to people who you believe are your ideal client, right? Which
Hmm.
means that means you already have to already be thinking about, well, what can I do and who can I do
Hmm.
it for, right?
Hmm.
And always the focus is outward, on serving
Hmm.
somebody outside of yourselves, and then now you
Hmm.
take that information to them and build on that. That was awesome. I think it's such a simple, right, process that people could do step by step. That at the end of the day, it can't fail because as long as they get any type of feedback back, then it's a blessing, it's a benefit because now you
Yeah.
can take that and go put that together with your plan. So yeah.
Yeah.
And is that as far as you working with? Because I know you also you work and help coaches as well, right? Specifically, what does that process look like with you working with coaches, and what are some of your goals normally when you're working with somebody? Where are you trying to take them from and take them to?
Yeah. So I do work with coaches. It's not something that I do a ton of, and I say
Hmm.
that because the coaching world is it's all right. It's an interesting world with a lot going on right now, and the thing that I would say more so that I care about is leadership. And so any
Mm. Okay.
entrepreneur who has a few people that they're leading, there's a little more desire there and a little more impact,
Okay.
and also a thing with coaches even is if people aren't faith-based, you got to be careful what they're teaching people. So I always look
Mm.
at coaches as teachers, and do I want more of that gospel out in the world? And so
That's a
that's why I'm
great
like
point.
really, really cautious with coaches, and I almost don't work with coaches anymore when that used to be a thing that I did. And
Mm.
because even someone can teach things that are good things with a bad heart, or
Mm-hmm.
someone could teach things that are bad things with a good heart, or there's
Right.
there's just a lot you have to be careful with there.
Right. Right.
So for me, the biggest thing is, and this is what I do with businesses, anyone, is I look at what's their mission, who's going to be impacted if I do this work, and is this something that I'm going to feel good about putting more of out in the world? And so
Right.
usually that's why I love leadership, because I believe if the business is a place that people are growing and being nourished and they're coming back home to their family a better person, that's something that I value. I really value the family unit. I really value when people are growing outside and feeling more fulfilled, more purpose, more of those things.
Mm. That's awesome. I think I talked to one of my guests before, and he was talking about how he loves to work with good people who
Hmm.
run good companies, right, to
Hmm.
try to provide good impact to the community, right, and that's
Hmm.
that's his marker, right, of how he goes and sifts through, right, who am I going to work with,
Yeah.
who am I not going to work with, right, because
Yeah.
he says he has about 12 employees. Says I don't want my employees to be spending time on something that would not be a benefit to the world at large, right,
Yes.
and so
Yes.
so yeah, man, I definitely understand you, man. I know we're coming to a close, man, and it's been a blessing having you on. I want to just ask you, man, how do people get in contact with you? Where can they find you?
Yeah. Ben. My name is Ben Steinbacher. If you go to Instagram, it's Ben
Mhm.
STEINBACHER Ben_Steinbacher_.
Gotcha.
That's a great way. Or I'm just going to throw out my phone number. Shoot me a text, 336-403-5781. Don't be shy. If you have a question or there's something I can do to add value, because most of what I do with people is I'll hop on calls, I'll text, I'll do stuff just to help a wide array of people when I have the bandwidth to.
Mm,
Usually I'm messaging 20, 30 people. I'm hopping on 3, 4 calls a day just because I want to make as many people's lives better as possible. And I
mm,
trust sowing and reaping, that if I just sow good seed, I will reap good seed, or reap a good harvest. I just don't know when or where or how.
mm. I love that though, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's more blessed to give than to receive, and so if we those who water shall be watered themselves, is what Proverbs say. So, man, I
Yeah.
really appreciate you coming on and for
Yeah.
sharing, your heart, sharing the impact that you're
Mhm.
having in the world. And thank you so much for all those who are listening in. Again, you can find us everywhere on any streaming platform. We're on Amazon, Apple, Spotify. Google. I mean, we're everywhere. Okay. Anywhere, if you want to find us, you can go to www.lionandthelambo.com. You'll see all the different places where we're streaming. And so you can find your favorite streaming platform. Listen in. Make sure you follow us there as well. And you also can find us on YouTube to catch the visual experience. If you are watching us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Make sure you share the podcast to somebody so they can hear Ben dropping the jewels, dropping the gems, right? Helping us to understand how important it is to understand who we are, right? Our identity, right? In God, so that we can move forward, right? In confidence. So thank you guys again for listening in. This is Lion and the Lambo podcast. And until next time, go impact the world. Talk to y'all later.